Yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of Rebirth, so there's no better time than now to start breaking down the songs on the album. Overall, this is probably one of my most focused efforts, and I would also say the easiest album that I've ever written. I've talked about the history of it quite a few times, but it's always been a very brief summary, so this is going to be the full story. Rebirth was written shortly after the demo was released, and at the same time that I was finishing up Insomnia, which is right around the fall of 2014. The songwriting style on the album's a continuation of the sound from the demo. Musically, it's pretty minimalistic, just about 2 or 3 riffs per song that are all derived from the single idea, usually some kind of repetitive fretboard pattern. The riffs are played over a constantly evolving rhythm section to create a sense of motion, and lyrically I was very focused on poetic aspects, keeping things somewhat ambiguous and using a lot of wordplay. But while the compositional techniques are the same, there's a couple of major differences both musically and philosophically. The biggest one is subject matter. The main inspiration for this album was my interest in philosophy at the time. If you look at the subjects on Insomnia and the demo, you can see I was coming from a fairly miserable place. I turned to philosophy as a means of understanding it, and the most influential book I read during this time was Human, All Too Human by Friedrich Nietzsche. I didn't so much adopt his idea, but instead I sort of used it to develop my own, and almost instantly I was able to look over my issues, and it was the sort of this excitement I got from seeing the world in a completely different perspective that inspired me to write the album and call it Rebirth. This is when I felt born again in my understanding of nihilism, abandoning the negative aspects of it and feeling liberated from the past and the future, both of which I believe we spend too much time living for rather than the present. Aside from my philosophical revolution, I also modified my approach towards black metal itself. On the demo, I was very much obsessed with sticking to what I thought were the rules. This meant going against some of my own musical inclinations. For some background, I started playing guitar through blues-based music, and I quickly moved towards Led Zeppelin, and then Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and so on. So I could play a ton of Jimmy Page and Maiden solos, and I got to be a really good lead guitar player. I think for this reason, on the creative side, I'm much better at writing leads, melodies, doing solos, and improvising than coming up with good original riffs, which I find to be the hardest part of songwriting. And despite playing guitar for over 10 years, I actually think I'm even better at writing lyrics. Now, what does this have to do with anything? I brought it very recently. Black metal riffs are fundamentally different from other style riffs in that they're minimally rhythmic. When you look at something like Transylvanian Hunger, it's actually a moving melody with a bass note attached to it that converts it into a chord progression. So you go from this to a riff. You don't get riffs like this. In traditional metal. So when I started to try and write black metal songs, I actually found that it was much easier than anything else that I tried to write in the past because I felt it played to my strengths. I could take melodies and make riffs out of them like this one. To get Wanderers. But back to my original point, I still got stuck in this mindset of what I thought black metal was, which was no solos, no intricate, complex parts. So on that album, I really did take away some of my own strengths. Wanderer really is the only song that has guitar solos. A couple of the songs have tremolo pick leads, but it's not anything out of the ordinary. The funny thing is, it's not like I was really trying to make a pure black metal album because I felt that it had already been perfected. There was really no point to doing something like Transylvanian Hunger again. For that reason, I don't use a lot of blast beats on the demo, but still there was just this mental block that I couldn't get over, and it kind of restricted how I approached writing the demo. What convinced me to change this mindset was the release of Alcest's Shelter in kind of a backwards way. Despite the second and third albums, Kai de Lune and Le Voyage de l'Âme, carrying strong black metal influences, Shelter was not only not black, but there was pretty much a complete absence of metal at all. Compared to even the first album, Souvenirs, which is a clean album, it still had distortion and carried a lot of heaviness to it, which is what really makes Alcest a special band. So hearing that, I felt that on the album, the decision to forego metal completely made it weaker, and it got me to reflect on my own music. And I realized that my decision to restrict including my full musical ability on the demo, especially really the one thing that I'm good at, which are the leads, must have been hindering my music. And to bring us all the way back, my goal in Rebirth was to incorporate all of my musicianship and write without restraints. And these are the aspects through which the project was essentially born again, philosophically liberated and musically unrestricted. What that translates to is I brought a lot of blues-based techniques and an improvised style into the songwriting. I did a lot less second-guessing as to what I was writing and just took whatever came out of my mind. Not just on guitar, but with lyrics, drums, bass, the whole thing. There's a lot of spontaneity in it. And that's really how the album was pretty much fully written over the month of October. I was just pumping out song after song. It actually got to the point where I had to stop myself from writing new material. The point was when I came up with a concept for a song called Origins, which would essentially tell my entire musical journey, starting with the blues, hard rock, heavy metal, finally black metal. The kicker was it's supposed to be one riff that just evolved from style to style, but I figured it was going to be at least 20 minutes long, so it grew bigger and bigger to the point where it had to be its own album. That's the main reason why I stopped, because I felt that I had to finish Insomnia, otherwise I would have kept going and that album would have never been released. Could it have been a mistake? Maybe. I think I could have written a lot more songs for Rebirth and possibly done a better job writing Origins, which I think suffered a bit from going on hold. It wasn't as focused as I hoped it would be. That's a story for the future though. But essentially I didn't touch that idea again until after Rebirth was complete. But anyway, the blues influence and semi-improvised songwriting approach is why I like to think of this album as black and blues, kind of like black and roll or something like that. I ended up with 5 songs, starting with the title track, Rebirth, which is meant to just introduce the concepts behind the album, followed by one of my best songs, Dreamer, some of my favorite lyrics that I've ever written. In the middle of the album, there's Sapphire Stones, which is actually a synonym for blues rock. This was meant to take the place of Origins, which was going to be absent from this album. And after that, there's Seer, which is my second favorite song on the album. Finally, it closes with Starlit Path, which was originally written for the demo, but I didn't end up finishing in time. Across the board, the lyrics are pretty consistent. They're all about the cycle of life and inevitable nature of death, although each song has its own story to sort of present that idea. After the album was written, I made the decision to wait and finish Insomnia because I felt that was more important to me at the time, which is why I released that first in January, even though Rebirth was already done. I started recording Rebirth pretty much right after, and I already had the perfect release date in mind, March 18th, which is my birthday. By this point, I was really starting to understand how to produce an album. The actual sound quality on it is still very lo-fi, which is exactly how I prefer it, but the dynamic leveling is much more consistent across all the songs. I recorded all the guitar parts in a single day, which came out to be about 6 hours of work, and I did all the vocals that very same night, which I think took about 90 minutes of recording. Like I said, I tried to do everything in a fairly impromptu manner. There's very little polishing to keep the sound authentic. The mixing style is still the same as the demo. You have a single track guitar panned opposite of the bass, while on this album the bass levels are slightly more appropriate compared to Insomnia, where I thought they were a little bit way overcompensated. The way the album developed definitely introduced a lot of techniques that I'm continuing to refine, and the way it was done is still the same approach that I use now, in that I try to do everything with as minimal takes as possible, and I keep the final product as close to the authentic recording. So both the recording and the mixing were finished really quickly, just like the songwriting. I think everything was done in less than a month, so by mid-February I had a complete album, and I pretty much just held on to it for a month and waited until March 18th just for the symbolic nature of releasing Rebirth on my birthday. The time finally came, passed, and I'm really happy with the result. In a way, it's kind of an experiment, and it's definitely played a very important role in establishing the sound that I've built today. Well, that's it for the general history of the album. There's plenty more to talk about on the individual song breakdowns. I just have to remember how to play them first.